Hi everyone, Gareth here. Just to let you know that if you would like to support the production of the Music Room podcast, you can. Just head to musicroompodcast.uk/support or click the link in the show notes. Okay, on with the show. Welcome to the Music Room. This time in the Music Room.
I used to go to London all the time, get for coffees, everyone was very nice. Loads of stuff fell through. Maybe some of it was personal, maybe some of it was circumstantial, I don't know. But in the end, I kind of went, 20 production companies can't all be wrong. At which point, I kind of went, well, look, actually, this library are really lovely and I'm still writing music, so just do that.
The sense of control, autonomy, agency, and all of these things are critical to positive mental health. That idea that you've got some ability to control what's happening around you with the knowledge that you can't control everything. That's really important.
Hello and welcome to the Music Room, the show where I usually chat with music industry professionals about what they're up to before going back in time to find out how it all began for them. I say usually because this episode is different. Why? Because this is Mental Health Awareness Week. Let me ask you a question. How is working in the music industry, whether you're a composer, a songwriter, a musician, a mix or mastering engineer, at a label, whatever it is, how has working in the music industry affected your mental health? It's a question that we perhaps don't ask ourselves often enough. I've wanted to make a special episode around mental health for a long time, and recently I felt like there are a lot of people in the music industry who are perhaps more aware of their own struggles. So if you're listening to this having experienced mental health issues of your own, then this is for you. If you listen to this episode and recognise that perhaps you might need to explore your own mental health further, then this is also for you. I'm going to look at the terminology surrounding mental health and some of the diagnosed mental health conditions or disorders as they're sometimes known. And in return, I'd like you to consider the question, does that sound like me? And if it does, start thinking about what you can do to either seek help or improve your mental health in some way. And believe me when I say, you're certainly not alone. Being a composer, songwriter or musician, for instance, often involves long stretches in isolation. And one of today's guests is going to talk about their experiences of that in more depth. That guest is Alex Attwood, a composer specialising in production library music. My other guest today is Grace Meadows, head of Music Minds Matter. And for those of you who don't know what Music Minds Matter is, their tagline is always have mental health support in your pocket. And Grace is going to explain what they do way better than I can in a few minutes' time. But if you work in music and are struggling to cope or know someone who is, you can talk to Music Minds Matter. It doesn't have to be a crisis or about music. They're here to listen, support and help at any time. Right, let's have a look at what it all means. I sometimes hear people describe having mental health issues as suffering from mental health, which, when you think about it, doesn't make a great deal of sense. You wouldn't say suffering from physical health. So I want to get that out straight away, because if we're having a conversation, it's important to get these things right and to look past the catch-all term of mental health. Okay, from the World Health Organization, they have key facts on their website. 1 in every 8 people in the world live with a mental disorder. I'm not sure I like the word disorder, but that's what they use. Mental disorders involve significant disturbances in thinking, emotional regulation or behaviour. There are many different types of mental disorders. Effective prevention and treatment options exist, and most people don't have access to effective care. And to that last point, I think in the UK there are certainly organisations you can reach out to, one being Music Minds Matter, as I've already mentioned. They list disorders as anxiety disorders, depression, bipolar disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, schizophrenia, eating disorders, disruptive behaviour and dissocial disorders, and neurodevelopmental disorders. So they go on. Who's at risk from developing a mental disorder? At any one time, a diverse set of individual, family, community and structural factors may combine to protect or undermine mental health. Although most people are resilient, people who are exposed to adverse circumstances, including poverty, violence, disability and inequality, are at a higher risk. Protective and risk factors include individual psychological and biological factors such as emotional skills as well as genetics. And I find that really interesting because although it mentions genetics there at the end, some things can be passed down, obviously. It leads with a variety of factors combining to create a scenario where your mental health can be affected. And anyone who's sat in a studio for months at a time, writing and recording their best work, often emailing and networking to a wall of silence, that to me sounds like you could be vulnerable to mental health issues popping up. Okay, so that's a bit of background to what I'm looking at in this episode. But before we get into the music room, let's have some music stories. I asked the Music Room Facebook group, how has being a composer, songwriter or musician affected your mental health? There were replies, and some agreed to have their replies read out now. I'm not going to mention names outside the Facebook group just to maintain that trust and support within the Music Room community. First one reads, I'm currently living with chronic illness that is at times hugely limiting. Over the last couple of months, for the first time, it's affecting my ability to write music and work for any significant length of time, and this is heartbreaking for me. In the past, I've had anxiety and depression and realised at the time that it was in part due to taking a long career break from writing music. Once I started up again, everything changed. It turns out I need to compose to keep me level and happy. Now I'm anxious about what will happen to both my career and mental health if I don't get physically better soon. Next, I write music and books to aid my mental health and fortunately only have to do it as a hobby rather than rely on for income. I've been through dark moments in my life and have survived to tell the story. That's great. Please reach out as everyone here in the group is here to help each other. And that's really nice of you to say. Lastly, I was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 30. I have a rare kind in which I only suffer with highs. I say suffer, but the truth is 1 or 2 highs have helped me produce my best work. That's interesting. As long as one is mindful of what triggers them and takes their medication consistently and follows doctor's orders, there is absolutely no reason why they can't live a full and wonderful life. Medication for life, and also happy to talk should anyone wish to. That goes to show, doesn't it, that you don't have to be at a critical point to address these things. And in that case, recognising what the issue was has helped them. It's also one of the things I love about the Music Room community. Everyone is so thoughtful, even when they're talking about themselves. So, Music Roomers, thanks for turning up and taking part. I really appreciate it. And those are today's music stories. Composer and multi-instrumentalist Alex Attwood is known for his versatile and atmospheric use of live and electronic music, creating scores that enhance and complement in any production. Commissions include The Longest Rain, Top Gear, Caribbean with Simon Reeve, Earth's Great Rivers, Dispatches and MasterChef. Grace Meadows is the new head of charity Music Minds Matter and has called upon people across the music industry to widen the mental health provision across the full spectrum of roles. Evolving out of the charity Help Musicians, Music Minds Matter began in 2017 as a 24-hour helpline for music industry workers to call for support and help. While this helpline is still a key part of the offering, it's now a charity in its own right with big plans for expansion. I was blown away by the candour of Alex and Grace. It's made me think about my own working day. So let's get into the music room and hear what they have to say. Composer Alex Attwood and head of Music Minds Matter, Grace Meadows, welcome to the music room.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Grace, let's start with you. As I mentioned there, you're the head of Music Minds Matter, which is part of Help Musicians. Tell us a little bit about the organisation and your role within that.
Great, yes. So Music Minds Matter is the sister charity of Help Musicians, which has been running for over 100 years. And it does what it says on the tin, really. It helps musicians and it helps them at challenging moments throughout their musical lives, but it also helps them to flourish and to help them be the musicians that they aspire to be. And of course, success looks different for everybody. So we think very much about what that musician or creator wants to achieve in their career, and we support them as best as we possibly can. So that comes with all kinds of different advice that we provide, whether it's business advice, whether it's health or welfare advice. But what we noticed around 2017 was that we were receiving more and more inquiries about the support for mental health needs of musicians. And that was a trend that was coming to us as well from across the industry as a whole. And so we set up a program within Help Musicians called Music Minds Matter. And what we realised was actually it needed to be its own thing because of the scale and the challenge that was being presented to us around mental health in the music industry. So a couple of years ago, it broke away and became its own charity, but it's very much connected into Help Musicians. So if you're a musician and you're coming to us with a mix of issues, and mental health might be one of those, then you'll be channeled into Music Minds Matter, and vice versa. If you come to Music Minds Matter and actually the support you can access from Help Musicians, then you're very much signposted to that. But Music Minds Matter, the big point of difference between that and Help Musicians is that Music Minds Matter is here for everybody working in the music ecosystem, because we can't just single out one group of people or one strand of the industry, because mental health belongs to us all. And so actually in just supporting one group or one segment, we're not really tackling the challenge that we're facing around mental health. And so whilst we provide services, we're also working to change culture around mental health, and for us to be able to have conversations around mental health where people feel safe to do so, but also for the industry as a whole to be putting mental health much more front of stage when it comes to working practices, the way that we want this industry to be understood in terms of how it's supporting the people that help it thrive.
And of course, one of the great things about Music Minds Matter is the accessibility. You know, if you are a PRS for Music member, you can access free counselling. So it's as simple as that. You know, you can get in touch straight away. So that accessibility, I think, is fantastic and really important as well. Alex, you're a composer. I try not to pigeonhole you, but you have become quite the expert in production library music.
It's been, certainly the predominance of what I've done in the last sort of 5-10 years now, yeah.
Yeah. So give us a little background about how you became a composer in the first place, and how did you end up concentrating on production music in particular?
So I started at university. I saw it very much as a platform for writing and playing funk music, basically, albeit with a massive student debt. I didn't really think it through. And it was wonderful. I ran a 10-piece funk band for 4 years, and it was like a giant family. Then uni finished, and I just moved into DJing, playing lots of jazz function bands. And it was a nice way of life. But I got engaged when I was about 24. And as I was coming in from work, my fiancée was getting up to go to college about 4 nights a week, or mornings a week. And I didn't think that was conducive to a happy marriage moving forward. So I was sort of rattling my brain as to how to make music work for me, but in a way that might actually dovetail into family life. And sort of composing popped up as an option. And I spent about 2 years just presumably what everyone else did, just writing demos, desperately trying to get work from anywhere. Landed a couple of lucky corporates, and then spent a whole year. I must have sent off about 300 DVDs that were tailor-made for different companies. I'd researched them. They all used to get individual postcards. I had 3 rejection emails out of the 300 and no other responses. Wow. It wasn't quite soul-destroying. Interestingly, the soul-destroying part of the career came later because I was young and enthusiastic at that point, and I evidently had enough chutzpah just to keep going. And out of nowhere, I landed a Disney cartoon from a company I'd not even approached. You make your own luck, I guess. The universe answered me in some peculiar way. And that was lovely. So I did a couple of cartoon series with Disney and a couple of subsidiaries. And just as that was kicking off, we got hit by 2008. And all sorts of things got cancelled, including everything I was working on. Coincided with us moving from Edinburgh to Herefordshire, which is obviously very rural. Wasn't a whole lot of sort of music stuff going on. And I certainly hadn't got the wherewithal to go looking for it because I'd never had to. It had always been on my doorstep. And I think that's something that I've really taken home after, a long time now, is you've got to realise what it is that you need early on. and know how to look for it, but it's easy to say now. So, yeah, I did a bit of library work, managed to get a BBC job, and then spent about 5-6 years doing BBC documentaries and travel docs, and it was great. For one reason or another, that petered out. People moved departments, different budgets went. It's the way of the world. And I ended up back with the library that I'd done work for and have a very good relationship with the UK MD. And that's all I've done for about 5-6 years. And it's lovely. He's a super guy. I like everyone in the team. The music is diverse. I get to write everything from sort of big band Latin to string quartets to country. It's a good way of life. I do enjoy it. But it has its drawbacks, which is why we're here.
Yes, indeed. We'll get onto that. Absolutely. But yeah, to have one main client, that's quite something, isn't it?
Well, interestingly, they have always encouraged me to diversify. It's not like they say don't work for anyone else. And I've looked for work with other libraries, and it's either not appealed to me or not appealed to the other library. And I got to go, wow.
Yeah. You found your library,
It's a well-fitting suit. Yeah, that's it.
Brilliant. So, Grace, you heard the music stories in today's episode about, there was one about living with chronic illness, there was writing music and books to aid mental health, and being bipolar and only suffering the highs, which is unusual. What do you see in your role as the main mental health challenges in the music sector and the impacts actually of those challenges on professional and personal life?
Gosh, where do we begin?
Yeah.
Well, I thought all of those comments that we received were fascinating. And I think what they touch upon is all of them is, and also we've also mentioned them here already, is the pressure to always be on. So it's an industry where if you're not there at the gig, either in person or online, someone else will be. And I certainly found that when I was studying, and there were lots of pressures about how you turn up, being perfect, getting it right, being invited back. That is hard, that performance element. And I don't think that's unique to musicians. I think that is in any role, especially when so much of the industry is structured around a freelance basis.
I was going to mention the word freelance, yeah.
Yeah, you're only as good as your last gig, right? It's a different setup when you're in a PAYE environment and there's structures and there's processes in place. But actually, if you're freelance and you think you've turned in some great work, but actually they don't like it for whatever reason, then that's kind of out of your control. And so there are lots of things that then span out of that, whether it's, the sense of control, autonomy, agency, and all of these things are critical to positive mental health. That idea that you've got some ability to control what's happening around you with the knowledge that you can't control everything. That's really important. But I think what accompanies all of that is the stress and the burnout that comes with that perpetual need to be on, to be visible, to be ready, to be responsive, but also the anxiety that can bring, and then the depression that comes with that. But we've all got a little bit of elastic in us, and we know when we can give a little bit more and then pull back and go, actually, I can take the foot off the gas a little bit at the moment because I know this is coming along the line and I probably need to save myself a bit for that. But actually, when that elastic is constantly being stretched, it's going to lose that that ability to be tense, and you're going to find yourself collapsing. So I think that those are some really, really key things that we're being presented with at the moment. And then, of course, what that does over time, as humans, we expect to experience stress. It's an innate feeling within us. It's what's kept us alive as a species, to be able to ward off threats. But it's when those stressors become chronic and they're having detrimental impacts on our well-being that we're moving into different territory around our mental health and our well-being. And it's when they escalate and there's behaviours that are really unhealthy that accompany that, or find that actually it becomes a really acute condition. So I think overall, having come back from the pandemic and now in this cost of living crisis, we thought things might be slightly different. But actually, I think there's this panic to do things really well. So we're constantly on. And then, as I say, the anxiety and depression that comes with that, and the stress and the burnout. And of course, then, the isolation and loneliness that can give rise to. You might not want to talk about any of these things. And so you can feel very alone. which again just perpetuates things. So it's really easy to find yourself and other people actually in spirals.
Yeah, absolutely right. Talking of isolation, Alex, you have experienced this, haven't you? Can you describe for us what mental health issues you've experienced? Can you actually pinpoint when you started to experience these issues, as well as maybe identify why they started?
Yeah. So Grace speaks so eloquently about it, actually. I think I probably learnt more in the last 5 minutes than the last 20 years about
absolutely.
my own predicament. I think, so the bit that, just to go back to what Grace was saying about the people accessing the services that she's offering with Music Minds Matter and Help Musicians is, I think even if you're accessing them, that in itself shows a sort of self-awareness, which I think a lot of people could really use more of, including myself, certainly. I think a big issue I suffered from was that I simply didn't have the emotional wherewithal to realise that I had become incredibly isolated, that I was stressed out. I was looking at everything in a very black and white manner. I'm married, I'm healthy, I have friends. What's the problem? Come on, pull yourself together, man. It's just a bit of work. And so to answer your question, I first noticed it was after we moved rurally in Herefordshire, and the work had dried up from 2008. And I was sort of beavering away, making demos and doing this and that, but I was basically creating smoke and mirrors, not to pretend I was working, because I genuinely felt like I ought to do something, but actually it was just so that I felt that I was doing something. And increasingly, I used to find myself sort of sitting on the stairs for 3 hours at a time, just with my head in my hands. And rather than going alarm bells, I'd sort of get up and go, right, that's sitting on the stairs taken care of. Let's go and sit outside for a bit and feel miserable there. Again, without really thinking, oh, this is a problem. And it came to a head. I think my wife came back and went, like, you could just get a job and maybe earn some money and go and meet some people, get some self-esteem. And this was an absolute anathema, because I'd already decided that I was a full-time composer, and I hadn't realised how much of my self-worth I'd poured into that construct. And to have this fragile construct shaken about like that turned into what we described as Muggate. I was so angry with her, I threw my mug of coffee into a tree.
Oh, no.
And that was a point at which we sort of looked at each other and went, I think there's a bit of an issue here.
Right.
That's not okay, is it? I was like, no, I'm sorry about that. That's right, that's a thing. So I think I sought counselling after that. But again, rather than looking at the sort of professional aspect of it, we just sort of looked at everything, because, I mean, you know, we're all victims of our own circumstance if you choose to look for it. And it's only really been in the last sort of year or two that I've gone, I've worked on my own for 20 years and we live really rurally, and I quite often go for full days at a time. In fact, frankly, full weeks at a time, where between, 9 and 4, I won't speak to anyone. I won't see anyone. There's no one to nudge and say, oh, have you just seen Spectrasonics have just done the latest update? Or, oh, I've just written a really, really bad 4 bars that's taken me 3 hours. What a klutz. There's no feedback. So it's not even an echo chamber, because there's no echo. It's just nothing. So without wishing to be unhelpful, I feel lucky, because I've had regular work, and that's lovely. So I haven't had the anxieties that Grace was talking of. And there's certainly been points at which I have worried very much for what I'm going to do for money. But actually, I've been so lucky with my publishing company and library. They've been brilliant. But what I have only just realised is that actually you do need to be around other people for a portion of the day. You need feedback. I would find myself going into social situations, maybe once or twice a week, and I've almost lost the art of conversation. You forget. You'll say something in a jokey manner and then wildly overthink it afterwards, because you've not really had any practice. So you start to lose your sense of, confidence, I guess. I even got social anxiety, which is not something I've ever had before. And I know it's reasonably common, but it's not something I'd had. And it's just from solitude. And the big hurdle for me was admitting it. People have hang-ups about different things. I've never been ashamed to say, I'm out of work, I haven't got any money, or I'm not feeling very well, or I failed at something, or I've upset somebody. A big hang-up for me took me about 15 years was say, I'm lonely. That was about the hardest thing I'd ever had to admit. And it sounded all the stranger to me because I do have friends and I do have a loving family. So I couldn't really work out, and it was a very sort of British thing of, well, better not make a fuss then, because actually the architecture of my life is fairly robust. So maybe there isn't a problem. But it's got to the point where I can't deny there's a problem, and it's not fair to those around me to deny there's a problem. Yeah. We have to accept it in order that I can do something about it. Yeah. And it's lovely because I do talk about it a lot more. And interestingly, that has encouraged quite a few other friends of mine who I thought were in a perfectly normal situation to go, oh, actually, I work on my own and it's really, really, really hard, and it's making me a not nice person to my family. And it's a bit of a taboo, I think.
Well, funnily enough, it was only in preparing for this episode that I realised, because I started podcasting in 2019, and that was its own project, but I continued. And obviously the pandemic happened and I started a podcast in order to just, have a little window to the world and keep conversations going with creative people. But it's only preparing for this episode that I realise it's because I'm isolated. That's why I podcast. That's why we're having a nice conversation now. We can see each other. And I love that. It keeps the wool from the door, or, whatever you want to call it. In the Music Room community, we have a regular weekly cuppa and chat, it's called. And it's usually 9:00 on a Thursday morning. And we just talk absolute nonsense. But it is that kind of office feeling. Grace, you're in your office now, but we're not. We're in a room by ourselves. And it's just a nice thing to do, to even if it's online. It's nice to have a conversation.
I think what you're both tapping into is what it means to be human. And we are inherently social creatures. So we need that contact. We need that feedback. We need to be able to sense check how we're viewing the world through other people's eyes. We need that stimulation, that challenge. And if we don't get it, suddenly it gives rise to stuff psychologically that it's almost like it has a breeding ground. Do you know what I mean? Because you've got nobody challenging that. So,
Well, then you develop the echo chamber of your own sort of self-doubt because there's no one to challenge you on it.
No. And one of the ways that really sort of resonates with me on the loneliness is I remember sitting for hours and hours in basement practice rooms at music college and thinking, what is the meaning of my life? I've now practiced this movement between E and D flat on the bassoon so many times that I can't feel my fingers. What is the meaning of life? Why am I doing this? Like, what difference, what impact am I having on the world? And what contribution am I having? And I think they're the kind of existential, big life questions that can sort of get in on you, which I think are good to think about. But actually, if you're not able to voice them and share them with other people, they can give rise to serious anxiety. You're sitting there practicing finger aids and thinking, what difference am I going to make to the world by learning how to do this? That really can shake you to the core and make you feel really anxious. And then it's only years later when I'm sitting in a music therapy clinic room and I'm like, well, I can play that transition really easily. I mean, no one else knows that, but there's this tiny kind of, it was all worth all those hours of isolation. But, was it, so there's just the isolation can really be quite a fertile breeding ground. And that's why I think the contact with other people is so important, so that you can sort of rein that in and keep it safe, because it is important to think about those big things, but not all the time. That's, you've got to stay present.
I think you've got to be smart because the nature of what we do, look behind me, I'm a noise-making explosion. Nothing in this room is conducive to having other people in the room with me trying to work. It's a nightmare. I'm either going to be bashing, hitting, strumming or doing something. Therefore, in order to keep up that social interaction that we need so much, you've got to think ahead of the curve and go, right, well, look, I probably can't have someone in this room with me right now. I can't, if you're in a solicitor's office, you could talk to other solicitors about soliciting things. I can't talk to anyone about the latest API 2500 compression knee, which is actually what I'd love to do, just for a little bit of time, not all day, just for a bit. So you've got to set up that little meeting, and that's what your coffee mornings are so brilliant for.
Oh, I've been bored so senseless by compressor talk. And honestly, You'd be most.
I could be that guy. I would love to bore you.
What I was going to ask you, Alex, is you mentioned about after Muggate, the tree incident, that you did seek counselling. Did that unlock anything for you? Were there massive revelations? Was it stuff you already knew? How did that all go?
I think because I just hadn't associated where I was at mentally with work. I just tied it all up with, my rather fortunate middle-class background and dived in there for for however many sessions of counselling I had. And it really wasn't until, I'm 43 now. I said it probably took me until I was 41 to go, maybe being on my own's not good for me. Because I like people. I like being around people. And that's what I mean about the scales falling. And for me, the biggest hurdle was realising that was, I'm not saying it's the issue, but it's certainly, you control the variables. And we all need things to live, thrive and survive. And one of those important things is, you sleep well and you try not to drink too much alcohol, and you try and be around people who, if not at least make you feel good about being yourself, remind you what it is to be human. And as Grace was saying, it's an inherently lonely and vulnerabilizing career because there's no structure to it. Yeah. You don't enter at level 1 musician, level 1 gigging, level 2 composing, level 3 mild fame. It's complete freefall. So you're making your own rules. Therefore, you have to bounce off other people who are in the same experience just to be able to compare notes and to say, oh, God, did your middle finger drop off after you practiced going from F to D for 3 years? Yes. Oh, right. But then I did a gig and I nailed it. So it was worth it. And so it contextualizes everything. I remember my brother, who's a medic, saying to me 10 years ago, I don't know how you do it. He's like, not only do you not know how much you're going to get paid at the end of every quarter, but there's also no metric with which to assess how you're doing in your career. You can't say, I've got band H. I'm on, £25,000 a year. I'm aspiring to get here. You could be writing the best music in the world and no one's listening. Or it's brilliant to you and no one cares. Or you could be writing music with boxing gloves and on BBC every day, making millions.
Grace, you're nodding to that.
There's two really, really big themes that you've just touched on. One is the precarious nature of this thing that we love, music, and having a life with it and working with it. And the other is how we measure success and what success looks like. And I think as an industry, we have a duty of care for those coming into it to have conversations with them about what success looks like for them. So I think in the way, Alex, you were talking about working out what you need as a person, I think that's one of the first things that you can do. A preventative step you can do is we think we know ourselves, and then Muggate happens and you go, oh, hello, hi, oh, where have you come from?
Who's this guy?
Who's this guy? But I think there's something about doing that reflective piece, and I don't think that that's airy-fairy. I think that is about having a level of emotional and psychological maturity that helps you navigate the world. So there's that piece of work, but there's also alongside that of what would success look like in my eyes for me and would help me feel like I'm winning at things. Not necessarily winning at life, but winning at things, because there's lots of ways to win at life. So I think there is a duty of care to be had around how do we help people think about what success looks like. As you say, Alex, when there's no structures there, and one day you can be gigging and it can be the best thing and you're on the road for ages and you're having a great time, but then whoa, all of those gigs dry up and you've got to go back into the studio, but actually you can't afford the studio. So that kind of precarious nature of it sort of goes hand in hand with what success looks like, because success for most people isn't a steady thing. So it's being able to find a way to hold on to your core, I guess, so that you can navigate that precariousness and the ups and downs of what your success looks like. Because nothing is ever constant. That's the thing, isn't it?
That's a lovely way of looking at it. And if I'm honest, I don't think, other than putting food on the table and the kind of the natural aspirations of having a young family, I'd never really got much further than going, what I'd like to provide, and I'd like to write music. I would love to have done more telly stuff, and as and when that became apparent that it wasn't happening, you kind of shift the goalposts. But I don't think, as an actual framed question, what does that look like? I'd certainly never thought about it. It was funny you saying, hello, who's this guy who suddenly walked in? Something did change at that point. I wasn't just sort of sitting on the stairs feeling miserable. I also got angry. I'd get angry in the car on my own in ways that I'd never done in my life. And it became like a third person in the room. Never to that extent again, but certainly I'd never been angry about anything before. And now, sort of 15, 18 years on, that guy's still there. He's a lot quieter, but he's still there. And I'd love to shush him up a little bit more at some point.
You have, I mean, to an extent, you've actually both answered my next question, which was going to be, what strategies would you give for coping with the challenges that can happen?
I've got two. I
was going to say, if you have additional things to say, of course.
But sorry, Grace, have you...
No, please.
Are you sure?
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously we've talked about your coffees and you're chatting with peers. So, it's lovely to have people who love you, but they don't really want to know the intricacies of your job all the time. And that is very reasonable. It's pretty boring. So the two bits I've got are, firstly, get other day jobs or volunteering. So I've done quite a lot of different volunteering over the last 10, 15 years. And it was a bit like going to church when you're a kid. You kind of slightly drag your feet on the way there going... And then you do it, and it's not that bad. And then you walk out going, woo! Either because that's it over for another week, or because you actually really enjoyed it and got something out of it. And it's lovely. You just need the diversity of experience. And just to remember, you're not the only person in the world. It's good just to get a different breath of air and to remember, you're not the only person who bad things or good things have happened to. It's really nice. And actually even side hustles. So I have done quite a lot of carpentry and furniture making and different jobs. And the more you do, the more you get out, and it's lovely. And I find it's not the more time I spend out of the studio, it just makes coming back to the studio more of a pleasure because you miss it. It feels like a drudge. But the other thing I was going to say is something that's really essential. So own your decisions. So it's really, really hard to make it in any kind of artistic career because of all the the lack of direct, directions, and as we were talking about. And I often wondered, well, at what point do you just say, maybe I'm just not very good at this? I'd like to think the world's not ready for me, but maybe I literally am just not that guy to do this thing at this time. And if you do, just own it and go, cool, well, that's all right. So I'm going to take what I've got and what I want to give and put it elsewhere. I'm still the same person. Or you can say, no, I am going to keep knocking on the door. And it might take another 5 years and it's still going to hurt. But I'm going to own that. I'm going to own that it's bad, it's painful, but it's on me. It's not on them. I'm not going to blame anyone else for not hiring me. And that's what happened to me when I ran out of road with writing documentaries and writing for the BBC, which was, it was a really nice stage of my career. And after they dried up, I used to go to London all the time, go out for coffees. Everyone was very nice. Loads of stuff fell through. Maybe some of it was personal, maybe some of it was circumstantial, I don't know. But in the end, I kind of went, 20 production companies can't all be wrong. So come on, let's do something else. At which point I kind of went, well, look, actually, this library are really lovely and I'm still writing music. So just do that. And I'm not saying no to the other stuff, but just own it. That's fine. I'll do that now. Because otherwise you just end up blaming. And that's the worst thing. You mustn't put that on anybody else. You've got to be master of your own situation. It's frustrating when other people change the course of it in ways that you don't want, but you've got to own it yourself if you want to move forward to the next bit.
Brilliant.
Yes, and that really nicely sets up what I was going to say about taking responsibility, but then also being really aware of what it is you can and can't control. To your point about being frustrated, there are only so many things we have the capacity to control as individuals. There are always other forces at work. And, if you don't say, look, I've done my best at this, but, for whatever reason, it's not worked out, then you aren't then going to give that critical voice or your top dog, whatever people, I know everyone's got a different name for their critical voice inside. Mine's top dog. But you can turn around and say, actually, can you just get off my case? I did a really good thing today, or I've worked on this project and I've done as well as I possibly can on it. So, I can't give any more of it and I have to just let it go. And then it means that you're not building up resentment. You're not blaming other people. If you haven't done a good enough job, well, then you can give yourself a hard time about that, and you can give yourself permission to be cross with yourself. But I think there's something about being able to take the emotion out of it, ironically, and say, hang on, let's look at this in a really practical way. Did you give it the time it needed? Did you give it everything you possibly could? Yes, great. Well, then, great piece of work that you can own. Move on. Next thing.
That's a lovely way of looking at it. And it's particularly pertinent in our field because as jobbing composers, we have almost no agency. We're the last in, first out to most productions. We're at the whim of probably 5 chains of command above us.
Yeah.
So to look at it and go, well, by my standards, have I performed in a way that makes me proud and happy with what I've set forward? Because, gosh, if you're only ever responding to what other people do, you are at the mercy of absolutely everybody.
Yeah.
So I was going to add to these kind of bank of resources to have to hand is again follows a point of yours, Alex, about finding your tribe. Find people that you can have conversations with where you feel safe professionally, but also who might be happy to have a conversation with you where it sort of blurs around the edges, because we are not separate people. Things blend and mix, and we are whole beings. But I think there is something about finding people who feel like you're a part of their tribe, and they don't have to be doing exactly the same job as you in the industry, but they might be people who have a similar outlook, or people that you aspire to achieve as much as they've achieved, or whatever it might be. But find them, and then connected to that, you might find yourself in a situation where you feel you can ask for support or mentoring or coaching in some way, because actually that can be a really good sounding board and a way of holding yourself accountable to your progress or your success. As we're saying, there is no framework necessarily for success, but if you have a mentoring relationship with somebody, for example, then you can set out your aspirations and put a time frame around that, and then you can sort of be checking in with them on a regular basis and saying, well, actually, I've been really lax. I haven't done anything about this. Well, that's why you're feeling stuck. Or it's not quite as simple as that, I know. But, there's a conversation that you can have there which keeps you, again, going back to the point that Alex and I have both been making around, owning stuff and knowing what belongs to you and what belongs out there. If you're desperately seeking to develop, then actually a lot of that sits with you. So you have to put things in place to help you do that. And having a confidant, a mentor, a trusted somebody can be a good way of doing that, really.
That sounds lovely. Where do I sign?
Yeah. You'll have a queue out
I'll send you my number.
I love the idea of having some sort of structure and points of reference to work towards, to have someone notice if you don't do something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually a really powerful thing, right? Rather than going, yeah, that's great. You've not done that, but why? And then you get into the why conversation. Well, what else has been going on then? Why haven't you focused on that?
Very often it's the wall of indifference, isn't it? That is the worst thing.
Yeah.
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 Oh.
That's a whole other
That's a whole other conversation.
I just hit you with a wall of indifference just then.
Oh.
It is. It's back out here. No, it is. It's exactly that, because we work just so terribly independently. You say we've got to form these strategies, find a tribe. And it's actually about, so as I said, personally, sorry to cank on about me again, but I've got these sets of pals that I play sport with and do loads of things, and they are the best of guys. But again, I can't nibble onto them about what I've been doing work-wise, and it's not like they don't ask, they do. But it's that tribe that you need to find. And it's, easier now with Zoomification, but still a step away.
So you've both given some absolutely fantastic advice over this episode, but I do ask every guest who comes onto the show to leave an item and a piece of advice in the music room for others to find. The advice, you might want to just choose the best bit of advice that you've already given, or you might have another bit. Alex, let's start with you. What item would you like to leave to begin with?
My item predictably is a musical instrument, but it's a hang drum, hand pan.
Yep.
I got all excited about a project 3 years ago and bought one, and they are aggressively expensive, and I regret it enormously. I had to sell it more recently to get myself out of some financial strife. But for the few years that I had it, it just reminded you why we got into what we're doing in the first place. You'd pass it and just go, dong. Oh, it's quite fun. Dong, dong. Bum, 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 bum. Because what we do is we play. And it just reminded you just to enjoy playing like a kid. And if you want to spend ages and work out some sort of crazy diatonic polyrhythm, do that. If you just want to hit it and make a nice sound with your daughter or your mate, that's also really fun. So have a handpan just to play on and remember that it's just playing and fun.
Oh, I love that. Yes, it's very easy to be distracted by the business aspects of what we do. So that's a great item. Grace, your item, what would you like to leave?
Oh, how do I follow that? I mean, playing is how we learn about the world. It's like everything, isn't it? You know, when we stop playing, you know, everything stops. I mean, I go to my musical instruments when I need some release, but I think for me, there's something about permission that I would leave for somebody to find, because we're not perfect, and it's okay for it not to always be going in the right direction, and to ask for support. And I don't think that we give each other or ourselves enough permission. So here's a massive envelope with permission in capital letters for somebody to cash at any point, anywhere.
Permission slips.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely.
Lovely.
That's great.
Permission and play. There you go.
Alex, your advice, what would you like to leave?
It's not going to be groundbreaking given what we've covered in the last hour. But my advice to anyone, I mean, actually, anyone young who ever comes and sits in, I always say, get a different career first. But that's not going to be my advice here. Like, do music for fun, and if it takes off, good on you. But make sure that you've got a teaching qualification or anything else first. But that's not my main one. My main one to people who are struggling, musicians, composers particularly who are struggling, is get out of the box. Get out of the studio as regularly as possible. Do as many different diverse things as you can. Play squash, help someone do dry stone walling, take an art class, whatever. Just change the landscape in as diverse a way as possible. Firstly, just to get some fresh wind on your face, and then to make you appreciate when you come back to the studio, because it's ultimately our choice that we do that, and we mustn't be its slave. Do it because you want to do it, and the only way that you can remember that you want to do it is by doing other stuff as well. And we need it, because writing music is a lonely job. And it can make you very vulnerable, and you're putting yourself out there for other people to judge you, whether that's by saying, I think that's crap, or I'm not going to give you any money for it, or I'm not going to give you the job. So in order to develop the robustness to deal with that, get out and about, do stuff, and then come back a little bit stronger.
I love that. Fantastic advice.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Grace, how do you follow
couldn't
that?
agree more. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. And I would add to that, obviously, use Music Minds Matter. It's there 24/7. It's there for the whole industry. Pick up the phone. There's always somebody ready to listen. And yeah, explore the services that are available. And I would also say, whether you're well into your career, whether you're coming into the industry, on your way out, just, you know, think about what success looks like for you and hold on to that, because you are not being measured by other people's success. What will make you truly content, and that's what we're looking for really in life, is contentment, is to know that you've done as well as you possibly could when it came to the things that you wanted to achieve. So I think there's something about setting out that expectation for yourself. When we manage our expectations, we're much happier people. So yeah, work out what success looks like for you. Everything that Alex said, which was absolutely spot on, couldn't agree more, and reach out to Music Minds Matter.
Speaking of which, how would people reach out to Music Minds Matter?
So you can go on to our website, Music Minds Matter, or you can give us a ring, 0808 802 8008.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll include the website in the show notes as well, so people can find that really easily.
Thank you.
Alex Attwood, Grace Meadows, thank you so much for joining me in the Music Room.
Oh, pleasure. Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Music Room podcast today. If you'd like to know more about the show or the community that surrounds it, head to musicroom.community. The link is in the show notes.